It's a quiet Sunday evening. A couple sits at their kitchen table with laptops open and bank apps glowing on their screens. They both have solid careers. She works in healthcare administration, earning around $60,000 a year. He's a project manager in a tech company, making close to $75,000. On paper, they're doing well. Their combined income puts them comfortably above the national average. Friends assume they must be saving, investing, and planning a bright future. But their faces tell a different story. They're not celebrating, they're calculating. Bills are due in 3 days. Their checking account balance looks smaller than it should. A credit card payment looms in the background. And the question hanging in the air is when they ask themselves every month, how are we making this much money and still feeling this broke? If that question sounds familiar, you're not alone. Millions of households today earn what would have been considered a dream income just a generation ago. Yet many of them live with constant financial tension. They work long hours. They juggle careers and family life. They do everything society told them was the right path. And still, they feel fragile, one unexpected expense away from panic. This isn't because people suddenly became bad with money. It's because the rules of the game quietly changed. We grew up believing that 2 incomes meant security. If one person working full-time could support a family decades ago, then surely 2 full-time workers should be able to build wealth, right? The math seems obvious. Double the income should mean double the safety. But real life doesn't follow simple math. It follows incentives, costs, and habits. And over time, those forces created a financial environment where 2 incomes became normal and then necessary. To understand how this happened, we have to go back in time. In the 1970s and 1980s, the typical household structure looked very different. One parent usually worked full-time, and the other handled much of the home life. That single income had to cover housing, food, transportation, and healthcare. And remarkably, it usually could. Families lived in smaller homes. Cars were simpler. College costs were lower. Medical bills, while still serious, were not the overwhelming burden they are today. Most importantly, those families had a buffer. If the working parent lost their job, the other adult could enter the workforce. That second income wasn't part of the monthly survival plan. It was an emergency switch that could be turned on when needed. That buffer was power. Fast forward to today. 2 income households are now the standard. In many places, 1 income alone cannot cover rent or a mortgage, let alone childcare, insurance, and groceries. The backup plan has become the main plan. Both adults work not to get ahead, but to stay afloat. This shift changed everything. When 2 incomes became common, markets adjusted. Housing prices adjusted. Childcare systems adjusted. Employers adjusted. Entire industries were built around the assumption that both parents would work. And gradually, costs expanded to absorb the extra income. What used to be optional became mandatory. A home in a good school district now requires a much higher payment. Childcare is no longer something a family figures out occasionally. It's a fixed line in the monthly budget. Health insurance premiums rise every year. Transportation costs double when both adults commute. Convenience spending increases when both adults are exhausted. And none of this feels like luxury. It feels like survival. Here's the emotional trap. When you look at your combined income, you feel like you should be okay. So you make decisions based on that number. You buy the house that 2 incomes can qualify for. You take on car payments that 2 incomes can manage. You build a lifestyle that assumes 2 paychecks will arrive every month, forever. This is where the ground becomes unstable. Because now your entire financial structure depends on everything going perfectly. No layoffs, no illness, no burnout. No career pause. No unexpected family responsibility. No major disruption. Life, of course, does not work that way. The moment 1 income is interrupted, the system shakes. And because fixed expenses were designed for two incomes, there's very little room to breathe. The family doesn't just lose money, it loses margin. Margin is the difference between surviving and panicking. And here's what makes this so dangerous. Most people don't see the trap forming. It feels like progress. Two incomes mean a nicer home, better neighborhood, safer schools, more opportunities for the kids. Each decision seems reasonable on its own. But together, they build a structure that is fragile beneath the surface. A structure that looks strong until pressure is applied. Now think about the psychological side of this. When both partners are working full-time, time becomes scarce. Energy becomes scarce. Decision-making becomes rushed. Cooking turns into takeout. Cleaning turns into paid services. Small convenience expenses stack up quietly. Not because people are irresponsible, but because they are tired. This creates a hidden cost of two incomes. Exhaustion spending. It's the coffee you didn't plan to buy. The delivery meal because nobody wants to cook. The extra car because schedules don't line up. The subscription you forgot to cancel because life is busy. Each one seems small. Together, they become a second mortgage in slow motion. At the same time, there's social pressure. Friends are upgrading their lives. Coworkers talk about vacations, renovations, new cars. You don't want to feel left behind. And since your income looks high, it feels justified. You're not being reckless. You're just living like everyone else. But everyone else is under the same pressure. This is how a generation of high earners became financially stretched. The tragedy is that most of these families are doing everything right. They got educated. They built careers. They partnered up. They followed the blueprint. Yet the outcome doesn't match the promise. So what's the real problem? It's not that two incomes are bad. It's that two incomes were never meant to be fully consumed by fixed expenses. They were meant to create safety. Instead, they created dependency. The difference between security and fragility is not how much you earn. It's how much flexibility you have. A household that needs every dollar just to survive is vulnerable, no matter how high the income looks. A household that can function on less than it earns has power, even if the income is modest. This is the uncomfortable truth of modern money. You can look rich and feel poor at the same time. And once you see this pattern, you start to notice it everywhere. People with good jobs who can't handle a single surprise bill. Couples who argue about money despite earning more than their parents ever did. Professionals who feel trapped in careers they don't enjoy because their lifestyle depends on it. This isn't a failure of character. It's a system built on the assumption that nothing will ever go wrong. But something always does. The real danger of the two-income trap is not financial. It's emotional. It turns work into obligation instead of opportunity. It turns money into fear instead of freedom. It makes people feel like they are running faster just to stay in the same place. And that's the moment where change has to begin. Not by blaming yourself, not by quitting your job overnight, but by seeing the structure clearly. Because once you understand the trap, you can start to design your way out of it. In the next part of this journey, we'll break down exactly how two incomes get consumed step by step, where the money actually goes, and why so many families are shocked when they calculate what their second income truly contributes after all the hidden costs. And more importantly, we'll begin to talk about a different way to build a household around flexibility instead of pressure. A way that restores what families used to have: margin, options, and peace of mind. That's where the real shift begins.
Now, let's slow this down and look closely at what actually happens to the second income once it enters a modern household. Because on paper, it looks powerful. An extra 40, 50, sometimes even 80,000 a year. That number feels like freedom. It feels like security. It feels like progress. But when families finally sit down and trace where that money goes, many are stunned by what they discover. The second income doesn't disappear in one dramatic moment. It leaks out quietly, through decisions that felt logical at the time. Let's start with housing, because this is usually the biggest shift. When a bank looks at a household with 2 incomes, it doesn't ask, "What kind of life do you want?" It asks, "What is the maximum you can afford?" And once that number is offered, it's very hard to ignore. A couple that qualifies for a modest home on 1 income suddenly qualifies for a much larger one on 2. Better location, better schools, safer neighborhood, more space. So they stretch, not recklessly. Responsibly, they tell themselves. After all, the payments are manageable as long as both incomes keep coming in. And this is where the foundation quietly changes. The home is no longer aligned with 1 income and supported by the second. It now requires both incomes to survive. Next comes transportation. 2 incomes almost always mean 2 cars, 2 commutes, 2 insurance policies, 2 maintenance schedules, 2 fuel budgets. Even if 1 car would technically work, time pressure pushes families toward convenience. Coordinating schedules becomes stressful. Emergencies feel harder. So, a second vehicle becomes necessary. That's another chunk of the second income spoken for. Then comes childcare. This is where the math turns brutal for many families. Daycare, after-school programs, babysitters, summer camps. These costs exist primarily because both adults are working, and in many cases, they consume a massive portion of 1 income on their own. Parents often joke that one partner is working just to pay for daycare. But behind the joke is a serious truth. The second income is now funding the ability to earn the second income. Add healthcare next. Employer insurance premiums, deductibles, copays, and uncovered expenses rise with household size and complexity. A dual-income family often chooses plans that prioritize stability and coverage, which is sensible, but costly. Medical expenses don't announce themselves politely. They arrive suddenly and demand cash. Now layer in taxes. A second income often pushes a household into a higher tax bracket. Not just federal, but state, local, payroll, and benefit-related deductions. The raw salary number looks impressive, but the net take-home is far less than expected. Many families are shocked when they calculate how much of that second income never even reaches their bank account. What's left begins to evaporate through lifestyle adjustments. Longer work hours mean less time. Less time means more spending. Eating out replaces cooking. Convenience replaces planning. Services replace labor. Cleaning, lawn care, food delivery, subscriptions, quick fixes, all tiny individually, but relentless together. This isn't indulgence. It's fatigue management. People aren't buying convenience because they're careless. They're buying it because they're exhausted. Then there's the invisible pressure to match the income level. When both partners work professional jobs, their social circle often looks similar. Conversations revolve around travel, home upgrades, experiences, kids' activities. Even when no one is trying to impress anyone, expectations form. What used to feel optional now feels standard. You don't want your kids to miss out. You don't want to feel like you're falling behind. So spending adjusts upward to meet the environment. At this point, something subtle happens. The second income no longer feels like extra. It feels expected, necessary, spoken for before it even arrives. And if you try to remove it, even hypothetically, the whole structure looks unstable. This is the moment many families experience quiet anxiety. Not panic, just a constant low-level tension. A feeling that everything is a bit tighter than it should be. That there's no real room for error. That a single disruption could cause serious stress. And here's the cruel irony. This anxiety exists even when income is high. That's because stress doesn't come from lack of money. It comes from lack of margin. Margin is what allows mistakes, rest, changes, and surprises. Without it, life feels brittle. Now, let's talk about the psychological cost of this setup, because it's rarely discussed, but deeply felt. When both partners must work to maintain the household, work stops being a choice. It becomes a requirement. Career dissatisfaction becomes harder to escape. Burnout becomes dangerous instead of inconvenient. One partner can't easily take a break, start a business, go back to school, or reduce hours without putting the entire household at risk. This creates a quiet sense of being trapped. People stay in roles they've outgrown. They tolerate stress they shouldn't. They delay dreams. Not because they lack ambition, but because the cost of stepping back feels too high. Money, which was supposed to create freedom, now enforces obligation. And this pressure leaks into relationships. When both partners are tired, stressed, and financially dependent on constant performance, small issues feel bigger. Arguments escalate faster. There's less patience, less grace, less space to recover from bad days. Money becomes the background tension even when it's not the topic of the argument. All of this happens gradually. No single decision ruins the household. It's the accumulation of reasonable choices in a system that rewards consumption and punishes flexibility. This is why budgeting alone often fails to solve the problem. You can track every dollar perfectly and still feel stuck. Because the issue isn't where the money goes. It's what the money is committed to. Fixed expenses are the real enemy of financial peace. Once they grow to match income, stress becomes permanent. So what's the alternative? It starts with a mindset shift that feels almost countercultural. Instead of asking, how much lifestyle can our income support? The better question becomes, how much flexibility can our lifestyle protect? This changes how decisions are made. A home is no longer just about square footage and location. It's about whether one income could temporarily carry it. Cars are evaluated not just for comfort, but for resilience. Expenses are measured not only by affordability today, but by survivability tomorrow. This doesn't mean giving everything up. It means refusing to let every dollar be claimed. The goal is not minimalism. The goal is margin. Margin gives you options. Options give you power. When a household creates even a small gap between income and fixed expenses, something remarkable happens. Stress begins to ease. Decisions feel less desperate. Work becomes slightly more optional. And that psychological relief often matters more than the numbers themselves. In the final part of this conversation, we'll bring this all together. We'll talk about how modern families can deliberately rebuild margin, even in a high-cost world. How to use income growth without surrendering flexibility, and how saving money in the future isn't about sacrifice. It's about designing a life that can bend without breaking. That's where real financial strength is built. The path forward begins with a simple but radical idea. Design your financial life so that it can survive change. Not just survive a job loss or a medical emergency, but survive growth, ambition, and uncertainty. Because the real danger for most families is not that they don't earn enough. It's that every improvement in income is immediately converted into a permanent obligation. To escape that cycle, families must rebuild margin intentionally. Margin is the space between what you earn and what you need. It is the breathing room of money. It is what allows you to pause, to pivot, to heal, to learn, and to choose. Without margin, even high income feels fragile. With margin, even modest income can feel powerful. The first step is redefining what success looks like. For decades, success has been marketed as visible upgrades, bigger homes, newer cars, more experiences, more subscriptions, more everything. But financial success is not about how much you consume. It is about how much control you have. Control over your time. Control over your stress. Control over your decisions. A family that can live on one income while earning two is not poor. It is strong because it has options. This shift begins with fixed expenses, not variable ones. Most people focus on cutting small costs. Coffee, entertainment, shopping. Those things matter, but they don't change the structure of the household. The structure is shaped by the big commitments: housing, vehicles, childcare, debt, and long-term contracts. These are the pillars that decide whether life feels tight or flexible. The question becomes, if one income disappeared tomorrow, what would break first? Would the mortgage still be manageable? Would the cars still be affordable? Would the bills still be covered? This is not pessimism. This is preparation. Families who design their lifestyle around one income and treat the second as surplus create a powerful buffer. That surplus can be used to eliminate debt, build emergency savings, invest for the future, and create freedom instead of stress. And here's the surprising part. This approach does not require poverty. It requires intentionality. It may mean choosing a home that is slightly smaller than what the bank approves. It may mean keeping a reliable car longer instead of upgrading immediately. It may mean questioning whether every convenience is truly necessary, not out of fear, but out of strategy. Because when expenses grow slower than income, something magical happens. Wealth begins to form quietly. Debt disappears faster. Savings grow steadily. Investments compound. And perhaps most importantly, the emotional relationship with money changes. Instead of fear, there is calm. Instead of pressure, there is confidence. Instead of dependency, there is independence. This also transforms how families think about work. When a household is not dependent on every paycheck to survive, work becomes less of a trap and more of a tool. One partner can reduce hours. Someone can go back to school. A business idea can be explored. A burnout phase can be healed instead of endured. Time becomes flexible again. And this flexibility strengthens relationships. Stress decreases when money is not constantly tight. Conversations become less defensive. Arguments lose their financial edge. Couples begin to see money not as a source of conflict, but as a shared strategy. The household stops running at full speed just to stand still. Instead, it begins to move with purpose. There is also a generational impact to this mindset. Children raised in households with margin learn something powerful. That money is not only for spending, but for stability and choice. They see patience. They see planning. They see that success does not require constant upgrades. They learn that financial strength is quiet, not flashy. And this lesson may be one of the greatest gifts a family can pass on. Now, none of this means that two incomes are bad. Two incomes can be a tremendous advantage when used wisely. The problem is not earning more. The problem is committing more. Income should create safety, not fragility. Growth should create freedom, not dependence. The future of saving money is not about deprivation. It is about design. Designing a life where money supports values instead of controlling them. Designing a lifestyle that can bend instead of break. Designing a structure that protects peace instead of chasing appearances. This is how families will survive the financial world of tomorrow. Because the world is becoming more expensive. Jobs are becoming less stable. Costs are becoming less predictable. The families who thrive will not be the ones who earn the most. They will be the ones who need the least to feel secure. And that is the paradox of modern wealth. True financial power is not measured by how much you can buy. It is measured by how little you must fear. When a household builds margin, it builds resilience. When it builds resilience, it builds freedom. And when freedom exists, money finally serves its original purpose: to support life, not dominate it. So the real question is not whether two incomes are good or bad. The real question is this: are your incomes building a cage? Or are they building a foundation? Because one leads to exhaustion, and the other leads to strength. And in the end, the families who win are not the ones who look rich. They are the ones who can breathe.